But we've all read about how they were thrown out of Jerusalem and everything was destroyed. And all they had to do was stop stealing.
Mhm.
I mean, that's like one of the things he says to them is, will you steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury? You know,
Well, what does he call the temple, and what does Jesus call it again? What was like 500 years later? A den of robbers, a den of
yeah.
thieves.
Well,
It's
it's everything that the people in Jeremiah's time wouldn't do.
yeah.
And God's like, just return to me. And they're
Mhm.
like, nope, not going to do it.
Mhm.
And he's like, well, don't even pray for them because if they won't return to me, then there's nothing for them
Yeah.
because he is the reward.
Right. Yeah,
Like
God
he is
himself.
the reward. They
Yeah.
wanted the temple. He's like, what, the temple? The temple? It's like the playoffs? Playoffs. Like God's like, temple? The temple?
Yeah.
I don't want the temple. I want you, you know? Welcome to Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. I'm Timothy.
And I'm Caleb.
And you're listening to Bible Discussions, the forum where we explore biblical topics that are relevant to your life. Today, we're continuing our series entitled The 10 Commandments, and we're going to be looking in this episode at what we call the 8th commandment. And this commandment, Caleb, is you shall not steal. Now, if I had to guess, I would say everyone has violated this commandment.
Yeah, almost definitely.
Hopefully we wouldn't have said that the last couple episodes with murder and adultery, but with this one, I think pretty much everybody's done this when they're a little kid. I know I can remember the first time that I stole something in my memory. I went to Bible school, ironically, and when I was a little kid, and
Shame.
and there was another kid in there. He had a pen that had a little ship in it. You know, it was when you tilt it and it slides
something
back
moves,
and forth.
yeah.
And so I liked that, so I took it, and then I left Bible class and went to my parents, and they're like, where'd you get that? Oh, somebody gave it to me. Oh. Who?
Yeah.
Then it was like, okay, I stole it, but so I had to give it back.
Yeah. Even if you didn't steal something as a kid, in which case you must have had like a really just boring childhood. um, we probably all steal at work, getting caught up in a casual conversation or taking too long on lunch break or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know that was one of Martin Luther's big things that he says, oh, if you steal from your employer, if you don't give it a good day's work. So, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, you didn't know that? Yeah. I don't have any quotes from him,
yeah.
but I did read he said that. So, but likewise, I think everybody's probably had something stolen from them. Either you've come back to your car and found a window broken out, or you've come to your home and a door broken in, or just something you left in the yard and it's gone, or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and also maybe a wallet out of your back pocket or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we find out in this commandment, though, that God wants us to protect the property rights of others.
Yeah.
And he wants our property rights to be protected as well. So why don't we begin by reading this epically long commandment?
Might be the shortest one, at least in English.
And it's the same in Exodus and Deuteronomy, just like before. Exodus 20:15 and Deuteronomy 5:19 say, you shall not steal. So,
and continuing with the theme of these short and sweet commandments.
Yeah, God gets right to the point. Don't steal. It makes sense to have this commandment as one of the 10 because these commandments are like a social compact that was supposed to keep the entire group of people together and healthy, wandering through the wilderness and then making it into the promised land. And, they're supposed to live together. Well, you can't have a community if people are stealing from each other, right?
Yeah. And so we talked about how the first few commands are really more about our relationship directly to God. And then the last several are about your relationship to your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
So most of these are like that, where if everyone's murdering, sleeping, stealing with or from each other, then you have no society at that point.
Yeah, because there's an analog, right? Maintaining community, you can't steal from each other. Maintaining family, you can't sleep with each other's spouses, and honoring your parents. If you don't honor your parents, community is going to fall apart. So there's no way to maintain
Yeah.
healthy community when the generations are bickering with each other.
Mhm.
So,
Yes, there is.
no, there isn't. Yeah. But I'm not exactly sure that this property rights thing is as straightforward as some of the other commandments. It's like, don't murder. We know if once you kill somebody, it's too late. Don't commit adultery. Once you cross that line, too late. The
Mhm.
husband's. But this whole thing with property rights is a little bit, I think, squishier, because it's like there's a sense in which none of us really own anything,
Mhm.
right? Because God made everything.
Yeah, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it.
And then there's also a sense in which we own everything because God gave it all to us, as it says in Genesis 1:27 and 28. It says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground.'" So we were supposed to increase in number and take over the whole world.
Mhm.
So he's given the whole thing to us, and it's all the resources of the world are in our control.
Yeah.
So
Y-
so maybe we do own it all, but
But well, we don't own it, but we're kind of in charge of it. We're
yeah,
the managers, the stewards.
yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, like property managers for God. Um, but initially, right, there was one part of all creation that was totally off limits to
Yeah.
mankind, right?
Yeah, right.
So
And it's only, the one part we couldn't live without, apparently.
yeah. So in Genesis 2:15 through 17, it says,
The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die."
so apparently the original sin was stealing. It's because we
Yeah.
stole fruit off of God's special tree.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the story of that Nathan tells David. Like, you've got all these trees, you've got a million sheep.
That's true.
Your neighbor has one, and that's the one you're going to take that one and kill it.
Yeah, that's my special tree. Don't touch it.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's like,
Yeah.
so it was God's property, and according to Eve, he had told them not even to touch it. So that is in Genesis 3:15 through 17. It says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, 'Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?' The woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die.' 'You will not certainly die,' the serpent said to the woman, 'for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.' When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves." So if you never were paying attention, you might not have noticed the first thing it says is that she took it.
Yeah.
So the initial sin there was seizing God's property.
That's right. Yeah, and if God did warn them not to even touch it, that would be the first command that she actually broke.
That's true. Yeah. Now, it turns out from the little speech that the snake gives that they were also kind of trying to usurp God's abilities, right?
Yeah, they want to steal his traits for themselves.
Yeah, they
So,
want to
yeah.
be able to do the things only he could do, and take that on themselves. So that's kind of a form of stealing, also. So Caleb, there's a kind of a cool story from history, and since you're our historian, I thought you might want to share it with everybody. But there's a story from Saint Augustine that's related to this.
Yeah, it's to stealing fruit
Yeah,
from
yeah.
a tree that wasn't his.
Mhm.
Yeah. So in Augustine's book Confessions, he tells us that he tells on himself here from a story in his youth where he and his friends stole a load of pears from a neighbor's property. So this is from his book Confessions, which he wrote around 400 AD. We carried off a huge load of pears, not to eat ourselves, but to dump out to the hogs after barely tasting some of them ourselves. Doing this pleased us all the more because it was forbidden. Such was my heart, O God, such was my heart, which thou didst pity even in that bottomless pit. Behold, now let my heart confess to thee what it was seeking there, when I was being gratuitously wanton, having no inducement to evil but the evil itself. It was foul, and I loved it. I loved my own undoing. I loved my error, not that for which I erred, but the error itself. A depraved soul falling away from security in thee to destruction in itself, seeking nothing from the shameful deed but shame itself. So, in other words, you know, it's like a toddler. They don't want the other toy until another kid picks it up, and suddenly they
Yeah.
have to have it. They have to have it, and they need to punch the other kid in the face to get it. Like,
Mhm.
it's just because it's forbidden that, like he says in this story, they got more pleasure from the act because they weren't supposed to do it.
Yeah. And then once they have it, they're not even interested in playing with it, or they're like, "Oh, do you want to play with me with this now?"
Yeah,
It's like, "No, I just got hit in the head with a toy."
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that line where he says it was foul and I loved it.
Hmm.
And he says it, they didn't even really want to eat the fruit. They were more interested in just breaking the rules.
Right.
And that is kind of fun when if everybody out there remembers when you were a kid and you were hanging out with a group of guys or gals
Right.
and
Well, if
you
you're if
decided to
you're
do something naughty.
yeah, I mean, you just can't help but be tempted to break the rules sometimes. If there's a
Mhm.
rock and the sign says "Don't climb on the rock," if the sign wasn't there, you just walk by it. But if it's there, you're like, hop up here,
Yeah.
just because I can.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So getting back to being God's property managers, now that we've gone on our little historical jaunt with Augustine, um, it seems very clear that God wants us to be responsible in our management of everything He's given us.
Yeah, and then that
It's,
was before the fall, right? Like the command to be the stewards of the earth,
yeah.
to go out and take control of the earth. That's what he wanted, you know, in his rightly ordered creation when he said it is good.
Yeah. I mean, he modifies it a little bit after the fall, but it's still basically the
Yeah.
same. It's a little bit harder, I guess, for
Hmm.
both of us, male and female. But, from this commandment, it seems clear that God wants us to take personal ownership of things, that He's codifying personal property rights
Hmm.
for
Yeah,
everybody.
I think there's an interesting relationship between rights and responsibility, and I think that's something I believe I've talked about this before. I think that's something that in our modern worldview we tend to just ignore. We think rights are like something we're entitled to. I have a right to life, liberty, and you have like the UN has a huge list of human rights now, education and like healthcare and all of these things, and it's basically just a list of entitlements. I think any intelligent, moral definition of rights needs to or list of rights needs to be based on what are your responsibilities. Like as a parent, you have a responsibility to raise your kid. That's why you have the right to make all the big decisions for them.
Hmm.
Like it's not your life, so why do you get to decide where they go to school and what they eat, what they do? Like because you have the responsibility of raising them into a responsible adult.
Yeah.
So any right you have is because you have a responsibility. So because God gives us the responsibility to care for the people, and nature and the things around us, we then have the right to retain control over that. You can't just walk in and take my stuff
Yeah.
because, well, I'm the one who's responsible for that, not you.
Well, it's like at the hospital, as soon as the baby's born, that baby belongs to the husband and wife. And if anybody
Hmm.
takes it, that's kidnapping.
Yeah.
And even though we don't think of people as property, I mean, it's certainly proper to think of that with a child that's in the total care of a parent.
Yeah.
And in fact, what's interesting is Jewish tradition says that what this law really means in the Ten Commandments is kidnap. It means
Hmm.
you shall not kidnap
Interesting.
specifically, and that it, there's capital punishment for kidnapping in the Old Testament law, but this idea is not necessarily backed up by the Hebrew words. I mean, I tried to look it up and see it's the same word everywhere that talks about stealing. So I don't know by what sleight of hand or whatever that they say this means kidnapping, and other places just means steal. Um, I mean, I think they're both. If you just go with the more broad definition of stealing, it covers kidnapping too, right?
Yeah.
So
I guess it's the highest escalation of stealing.
yeah.
So
But this idea, though, of parents and owning their own kids and being the ones responsible for them, right? If you are irresponsible as a parent in our society, they can be taken away from you. You know, if you're an abusive person or you're strung out on drugs and can't care for them, you know, the state can take that right upon itself and then try to put the kid in foster care. It's a terrible solution, but so is it also terrible that the parent is strung out on drugs or is
if they've
abusive.
abdicated their responsibility, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
the state has some level of responsibility for
Mhm.
the well-being of the children too.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have to step in and
So
change
then,
things.
so then, how do we define stealing? You know, in this context where we're supposed to be the managers and do a good job and be responsible with everything that we have. So there's another historical statement here. If you
Yeah.
want to share that with everybody.
John Chrysostom, who was Archbishop of Constantinople in the 300s, he said, "Not to enable the poor to share in our goods is to steal from them."
Yeah.
So charity, right? To be uncharitable is the same as stealing, or in the context we were just talking about, to be irresponsible with your goods, like when in the parable of the talents, right? When the servants are given varying amounts of money, and two of them invest it and turn a profit, and one of them buries it because he doesn't want to lose any of it. And then the
Yeah.
master comes back and he's like, "What are you doing? If I wanted the one talent to stay one talent, I could have just kept it in my pocket. Didn't need to waste time with you." And this is kind of similar. If you hoard everything to yourself,
Yeah.
you don't invest it in any people, you don't share it, you don't bless your neighbors,
Yeah.
then why? What was the point of that?
Yeah. I mean, if you have a closet full of coats, you know, and yet you know your neighbor is, you know, out in the cold without a coat, then why aren't you loaning them or giving them your coat?
Yeah.
And that was kind of reminds me of, I just thought of this. This is from a long while back, but there was a revolution in the Philippines, and Marcos, the President Marcos, was thrown out of office, and his wife Imelda, when they went into the presidential palace, had like thousands of pairs of shoes,
Yeah.
and it became emblematic of, you know, the authoritarian rule of
opulence,
Marcos, that
yeah.
she just had all these shoes.
Yeah, I don't know
And-
about you, but I can't seem to fit more than one pair of shoes on at a time.
yeah, yeah. So, anyways, those are some interesting things. So it makes sense, right? If you consider, like Caleb said, the hoarding of goods just entices other people to steal them. It also makes sense to somehow, if you're going to be responsible with your management of your goods, let's say you're a wealth producer, maybe you're somebody who knows how to generate a lot of wealth. You have good ideas. You're industrious. You start companies or whatever. Well, you can employ people, you know. So that's a way of sharing property with people too, involving other people in your industry, products and jobs and things that make other people's lives better too. And that's something that's worked pretty well in our country. But it's just a biblical concept. Like if you go back and read Proverbs 31 about the perfect woman, you know, I mean, she's out doing stuff like that all day. She's doing seamstress work. She's buying and selling property. She's doing like all these things that make her the amazing person that she's described to be. But they're all these industrious things that make for a better community for everybody.
Yeah, and like you're saying, if you're blessed with a lot of wealth, and you choose to do something that kind of creates an industry, creates jobs, that enables someone in your community to have the dignity of working for their money.
Yeah.
If you just hoard it, then like you're saying, that could even entice somebody to steal, right? Because if they know that there's a treasure hoard. I mean, like the greatest Western villain of all time in all Western mythology and fiction is the dragon. What does the dragon do?
Yeah, sits on a big pile of gold.
He sits on a
yeah.
massive pile of gold, and somebody always comes in and steals a golden cup, and then the dragon is like, "No!" He knows it's missing out of all of his wealth, and then like lays waste to the town, you know. And it's that's what the reason for that story existing is. That it's saying like that's what you turn into if you become a miser.
Yeah, that's a good point too. So, property rights are essential to allowing an economy to support a community, right? To allow people to support one another, to establish boundaries, so that people can respect one another's space, but also, create the ability for you to transfer stuff to each other. I can give you something and it becomes your property, and I feel good about it because I'm helping somebody else. And so, that exchange is protected by a law like this.
Right. And yet
So,
people still steal. Like we were talking about it. Probably
yeah,
all of
yeah.
us have.
Yeah. Even though God's codified it and said everybody should respect personal property, respect other people's industry, respect other people's dignity, and we still steal and cheat each other. So, so if you think about this law of do not steal, there's a sense in which every other one of the commandments is a form of stealing, right? So like we started out the way we numbered them anyway. First one was no other gods before me. Well, if you try to give the supremacy to some other thing, then you're giving God's throne to that thing.
Yeah.
You're stealing God's throne.
We talked about the graven images, how they are attributing the credit for what God's done to this thing they made with their own hands, or in a weird way to themselves somehow, and that's stealing God's like reputation. That's stealing the credit, the glory that's due Him.
Yeah, like Aaron said to everybody when he created the calf,
this is the God that brought you out of Egypt.
It's like, what?
That's weird. This is the first time I'm seeing him, but I guess.
And then we had like using God's name in vain, right? Like you're stealing his authority. You're saying, oh, I've got God's name. I say this is what he means. This is what he says. And God's like, no, you don't speak for me.
Yeah. Working on the Sabbath would be trying to make more money than others, for example. Some of these are not as direct. There's a way you could break them that would be stealing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, taking advantage of your parents instead of honoring them. Maybe you live in their house longer than you should. I mean, that's kind of a thing that's endemic in our culture right now, right? People living in their parents' house till they're 40 years old or something, playing video games. But you're taking the free ride off of your parents, and that's a form of stealing from them, and just not becoming what they hoped you would become, when they poured into you the resources of their kingdom, so that you could be the best you could end up being, and you're in their basement playing video games.
Yeah. Well, I promise I'm looking for a house. Murder, I mean, one of the most common like phrases that we'll use to talk about murder is taking a life.
Yeah.
Right? You take somebody's life from them.
Yeah, and then adultery, you're really taking someone's spouse, right?
Stealing, I don't know if there's a way we can bend this one to be about stealing somehow, but...
wait, I know. Stealing. Yeah. And then bearing false witness, right? That's taking someone's good reputation from them. It's even worse than that, really. It could mean their death. We'll talk about that next week when we talk about that one. But
well, I mean, in a very literal legal sense of what bearing false witness would mean.
Yeah, if they were up on murder charges,
you read, or if they're up on nothing charges like Jesus was, and the Pharisees railed in a bunch of false witnesses to condemn him. Yeah.
Yeah, you're stealing someone's reputation. You're stealing opportunity from them, because if they become incarcerated, they lose their opportunity to go out and be industrious and have dignity and have their own property. They lose all that. And then covetousness, right? That's like the one that says, I want all of the above. I want to steal all of that stuff from everybody. They have it and I want it.
Yeah. Well, like we talked about, that's kind of the first thing. I think envy has to be the prerequisite for any other sin. Like the snake tells Eve, you'll be like God. She thinks, oh, I want that.
Yeah.
She sees that the fruit is good for eating, or in other words, she pretty much lusts after it. And once you decide, I want that thing, I should have it.
And then that's the theft, taking it for yourself. Speaking of bearing false witness against people and gossip and rumor and slander, I know we're going to get into that next week, but there is a little story I have that I wanted to share. that it comes from Saint Philip Neri, the second apostle of Rome. He lived from about 1515 to 1595 AD, and it said that a woman came to him and confessed that she'd been gossiping. And he told her, as her penance, that she should go home, pluck a chicken, and then take the feathers and spread them all around town. And I've heard various versions of this story. I've heard some where he says, place one on the doorstep of every house in town and stuff like that. Well, anyways, and then come back and see me tomorrow. So she goes home, she does that, and she goes back to him and says, well, I did what you asked me. So, can I have, absolution of my sin? And he's like, oh, there's one more thing that you need to do, and that is go collect every one of the feathers and bring them all back to me. She's like, what? That was impossible. I mean, the wind's already carried them far away and far and wide, and I don't know how to get them back. And he's like, well, that's how it is with gossip and slander.
Yeah.
The persons who hear it go on their various ways and spread it far and wide, and there's no way to get it back.
Yeah, it's like a bag of wind, like some mythological stories or the SpongeBob SquarePants movie have a bag of wind, and once you open it up, the wind, it's just gone. You can't get it back in.
Well, and yeah, once you've broken, this, like you've broken somebody's reputation, you've stolen their good name, there's no way to repair it in the minds of some people that you never see again that hear the story.
Yeah, and that's interesting. So back to the stealing command specifically, this is something I wanted to bring up. We talked about in the episode on murder how this is a I forget the word you used. It's a fair, like a very equal justice system. Retaliatory, right?
Yeah.
A retaliatory justice system. Eye for an eye, right?
Yes.
A life for a life,
Mhm.
rather than an escalatory system, like a kind of a feud system. I used the example of Dinah, right? Jacob's daughter who's raped by a neighboring tribe, and then some of Jacob's sons like, I know, let's go kill a bunch of their men. It's like, well, that's a lot more damage than what was initially done. So everybody's just gonna end up killing each other.
Yeah.
But it's interesting with stealing. We talked about this when we did. We were looking at David's response to Nathan. How he says, "Oh, that guy's got to pay back 4 times for the sheep that he stole."
22:1, I think
It's
it was.
interesting that stealing is actually not eye for an eye. It's not sheep for a sheep. It's 5 oxen for an ox. It's 4 sheep for a sheep.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I think there's something to there where it's like you can't undo it in a way.
Yeah, you have to make restitution on theft.
Yeah.
In a lot of them, we're not digging down into the minutia. In fact, we kind of criticize David for being an expert on the minutia of all those things, and then forgetting about murder and adultery and all that. But
it's odd that proportionally the penalty for stealing would be not harsher but more unequal than for murder.
Yeah. Well, on almost all of these sins, and any sin, I mean, especially we're aware of this in the Christian system of repentance and forgiveness, that you're not going to be able to recover from this without God's help.
Well, yeah. So think about the original sin. How is Eve supposed to give God back 4 times of what she tried to steal from him, which was his glory? You can't do that.
That's true. That's a good one. This is something that Jeremiah kind of speaks to in his famous temple sermon. And, God wants to forgive us, and with God's help, we can be forgiven of anything. So listen to what Jeremiah says in this famous sermon in Jeremiah 7:1-15.
This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Stand at the gate of the Lord's house, and there proclaim this message. Hear the word of the Lord, all you people of Judah, who come through these gates to worship the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Reform your ways and your actions, and I will let you live in this place. Do not trust in deceptive words and say, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. If you really change your ways and your actions and deal with each other justly, if you do not oppress the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not follow other gods to your own harm, then I will let you live in this place, in the land I gave to your ancestors forever and ever. But look, you are trusting in deceptive words that are worthless. Will you steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury, burn incense to Baal, and follow other gods you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house which bears my name, and say, we are safe, safe to do all these detestable things? Has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers to you? But I have been watching, declares the Lord. Go now to the place in Shiloh where I first made a dwelling for my name, and see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel. While you were doing all these things, declares the Lord, I spoke to you again and again, but you did not listen. I called you, but you did not answer. Therefore, what I did to Shiloh, I will now do to the house that bears my name, the temple you trust in, the place I gave to you and your ancestors. I will thrust you from my presence, just as I did all your fellow Israelites, the people of Ephraim.
So I think it's really interesting that if you think of what happened, we've all read, if you've been with our podcast since the beginning, I know you've read it, but we've all read about how they were thrown out of Jerusalem and everything was destroyed. And all they had to do was stop stealing.
Mhm.
I mean, that's like one of the things he says to them is, will you steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury?
Well, what does he call the temple, and what does Jesus call it again? What was like 500 years later? A den of robbers, a den of
Yeah.
thieves.
Mm-hmm. And so if they just would have stopped and started obeying the commands again, stop doing the wrong things and start obeying him and, return to him, he would have healed them,
Mm-hmm.
but they wouldn't do it. And I think it's interesting, this temple of the Lord, temple of the Lord, temple of the Lord. You know which commandment they're breaking when they say that over and over again?
His name in vain.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
he mentions that. He says, this
they're-
place bears my name.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole thing is about you think you can just throw my name out there and say, oh, we're safe, but
Mhm.
nope.
Yeah, that's exactly because they oppress the fatherless or the widow and etc. or the foreigner,
Mhm.
and then want to come back to his house
Yeah.
and anything that you trust in, and that's a warning to us as well as Christians. I mean, if you just every morning you read your Bible and you think I read the Bible, I have the word of the Lord, the word of the Lord, the word of the
Yes.
Lord,
Yeah.
and then you
Mhm.
go extort somebody
Yeah.
for your day of work or something. Like, that's not you. You clearly didn't actually hear the word of the Lord. It fell on deaf ears.
Yeah.
Or if you're trusting in the church or you're trusting in your pastor or whatever it is, uh, it's a good blessing from the Lord, but that's not actually getting into your heart.
Yeah.
You're just using it as an excuse
Mm-hmm.
to convince yourself that you're good.
Yeah. You got to load that program in there, like we talked about a couple of weeks ago.
Mhm.
Man does not live on bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. It's the parable of the computer that we talked about. You have to
Mhm.
load a good program before you turn the computer on because it's going to put out garbage.
Yeah.
And so you got to load a good program in you before you bother eating your breakfast. Make sure you've got a word from God and what you need to do that day.
Mhm.
All right. So it's interesting though that the very first sin that he mentions in verse 9 there is stealing.
Yeah.
So all they had to do was stop trusting in the Lord's name in vain and start doing the things he asked them to do, like not steal, not murder, not commit adultery. Just follow the 10 commandments and they would still be having a king in David's line in Jerusalem and the temple would still be there.
Mhm.
So interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The temple wasn't always there. I mean, he tells them go look at Shiloh where the tabernacle was set up.
Mm-hmm.
They had a tabernacle
Yeah.
since the Exodus, but even before that, I mean, the tabernacle wasn't really necessary per se. God was still dealing with them, like with Moses directly, and then through Moses to them, and then the temple's built eventually when they have the ability to do that. But and they had made that the thing. Like, this is basically our God.
Well, you mentioned that Bible study won't save you by itself. And right after this passage, I didn't include it in here, but you can go read continuing in verse 16. And God tells Jeremiah, don't even pray for these people.
Hmm.
Because if they're not going to do what I ask them to do, they're not my people.
Yeah.
I'm not going to listen to anything you say. But like you said earlier, if they turn and come back to him and start doing the right thing, he'd be more than happy to take them back, just like we've seen with many stories like Hosea and others we've talked about recently. All right, so even though property rights are enshrined in the Ten Commandments, they're fully protected. I can't take Caleb's stuff. He can't take my stuff. Okay. But there are some pitfalls, right, to wealth and property ownership.
Yeah.
So before we go, then God protects my right to have all the stuff I have, and you guys stay away from it.
Yeah.
So one concept for this, to talk about this, is in 1 Timothy 6, verses 6 through 10. And it says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs."
Yeah, that's a famous verse. In some translations, it says the love of money is the root of all evil,
Yeah.
which sometimes gets overblown.
And many people think Ben Franklin said it too, but it's actually from the Bible.
For him, that was the love of French women, I think.
Okay, we're already done with the adultery episode. So, all right.
Well, he wasn't.
So the love of money, right, and wanting to get rich, these are big problems, and they're basically idolatry, right?
Yeah. Pastor Brian Wolfmueller, who I've quoted on here before, he likes to interpret each command as God protecting one of his gifts to us, right? And so if you mistake the gift for the giver, you start loving the gift, obsessing over the gift, you're wrong. Like that's idolatry. You now put that above God. And so the money is given as a tool, as a blessing. Once you treat it as the blesser, the thing that's going to get you all the things that you think you want or need, then you've left the path of wisdom.
Yeah, that's good advice. And it's idolatry because you're being motivated by something other than the love of God. And so that's why he started out in the section we read saying that godliness with contentment is great gain. Because if you have that, then you have more riches than anybody who has fancy cars and houses and stuff.
Right. And Paul elsewhere says that he's learned the secret of contentment in plenty or with little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a callback to the first commandment of putting God first in everything.
Yeah, but you could think, well, that's easy for Paul to say because he's writing this from probably fresh off of being whipped by the Romans and thrown in jail. So
shipwrecked.
He's got to put his hope in something else than wealth, doesn't he? But look at what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes. I mean, Solomon was incredibly wealthy, had everything you could want in terms of property, money, women, respect. He had world leaders coming to him to pay tribute and seek his wisdom. So here's what he says in Ecclesiastes 5:10-15. "Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there is nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands." So in other words, your money's taken from you eventually, if not while you're alive through some misfortune, which you can never fully guard against, no matter how much insurance you have, no matter what you're invested in. The nuclear war could start, and it's all not going to matter.
Yeah,
or at least it's all going to be wrested from you when you die, and you don't get to take any of it with you.
Yeah, and I love Solomon says wealthy probably one of the wealthiest people who ever lived in the history of the world.
Hmm.
And he says that the love of money and wealth can never be satisfied.
Yeah.
I think he might be a good judge of that.
We've shared another Augustine, or maybe it's Aquinas quote on here, where we said the man who is lost in his passions is less lost than the man who's lost his passion.
Mm-hmm,
The
mm-hmm.
problem with money is that's not the actual passion, you know? So anyone who's a glutton for food, who lusts for sex, you know, uh, who wants to drink, those are the passions. But any guy who thinks, money can get me more of those things, and then he just forgets about those things because he wants to chase the money, he's not actually, he's a further step removed from the thing
Mm.
that, at least in its proper context, would be good. You know, the problem with money is one of my favorite movies is A Knight's Tale, right? And when then the squires are having, the knight has died and they're thinking about impersonating him and going to tournaments and stuff. Uh, one, one guy says, you know, that's like a fantasy, but a full stomach, that dream can come true. You can fill your stomach with food. You can fill your house with stuff. You can never put a cap on your bank account. If you have 1,000, it could become 2,000. It could become 5, 10, 100,000. It could always go up. You can't fill it.
Yeah.
And so there's never security there. There's never an
Well,
end to that.
Not only that, but the more of it you have, the more problems you have. I really like this in Solomon's thing, because he says in verse 11, he says, as goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? He's like, I'm watching all of these parasites eat all my stuff.
Well, that's back to the dragon sitting on his hoard. It just tempts somebody to come and take it.
Yeah.
That's what happens in The Hobbit, right? The dwarves had built this massive, wealthy kingdom under the mountain, and everybody knew that's where all the gold and jewels were. And so eventually a dragon thinks, I could just come in there and stomp on everybody and take all the gold. And he does.
Well, and the thing is, it amounts to nothing in the end, because you can't take it with you.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can't stay with it, and, you know, you can't even protect it, you know, while you're here. Calamities and other things can take it away from you. So pursuing it is completely meaningless, as Solomon says.
Right.
And he should know. But so what do you pursue instead? Like, how do you find your way out of this dead end cycle, right? Of pursuing more money so you can pursue more stuff. And in Romans 13, getting back to Paul, he says in verses 8 through 10, he says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be are summed up in this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law.
Yeah. And the nice thing about the Bible, unlike the Beatles or anyone else is saying this platitude, you know, about love being what makes the world go round, love is all you need, whatever. The Bible also not only defines, it also models love. I mean, what Christ did for us is love. You know, greater love has no man than he who lays down his life for his friends.
Well, yeah, I said, what are you supposed to pursue instead is what I ask. And so you're supposed to pursue love, but if you follow the model you're talking about, that means you're pursuing a cross.
Yeah.
You're picking up your
It's
cross and carrying it.
self-sacrificial. Yeah. The world's idea of love is like a happy feeling that you get when you're around somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus, I mean, I'm sure Jesus was glad to go to the cross for us, but I'm sure he wasn't like happy as he hung on the cross. It's two different things. But loving others does mean putting the needs of other people before your own needs. I mean, that I think is the model of Christ. It means, in the case of what we're talking about, how you properly manage property, right? It means sharing your belongings as needed.
Yeah, and you don't destroy the human relationships by stealing. I mean, nobody loves the guy who stole from them. That destroys the possibility of love, you know?
Yeah.
It's so much harder to build trust up than to break it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it shouldn't be done. And so when you're given the chance, right? Like if you were given the chance by somebody who was a friend of yours to help them, I would like to think that you would help them, you know? You would share your resources with them. So if you would help a friend who is in need, then why would you ever steal from them, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And when you were in need, why don't you just give them the opportunity to bless you
Yeah.
by being charitable?
It's kind of like when Jesus always wants to up the ante. You've heard it was said this, but I tell you this, and then makes it sound even more demanding. It's
Yeah.
like not
Mhm.
only do you not steal from your neighbor, you actually have to help him build up his own well-being.
Yeah, yeah.
You have
Well,
to invest in him.
in a way, God had already stolen his thunder on this one because in the Ten Commandments, he's like, oh, don't steal. And then in 2 weeks, in 2 episodes, we're going to talk
Mm.
about, and don't even covet.
Yeah.
What? It's like, I haven't even stolen yet. That's still wrong. I just wanted it. No, too
Yeah.
bad. So that one kind of supersedes and I guess foreshadows a lot of the things Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount about the other ones.
So Proverbs 30, we have a passage here that from the sayings of Agur, as everyone knows. Verses 7 through 9. Two things I ask of you, Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of my God. It's like we were kind of talking about earlier, becoming too poor. If some guy is hoarding all the wealth, suddenly you're tempted to steal,
Mhm.
right? He doesn't want to be either one of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, having too many riches reminds me of the Laodiceans in Revelation, which we've read a couple of
Mhm.
times on the podcast in the past. If you go back and check that out, to the church in Laodicea, Jesus says, "Well, you think you're self sufficient, but you're not." You know,
Mhm.
and I think that's the problem when you have enough riches. You think, "Oh, well, I'm a god unto myself.
Yeah.
I can provide the needs for myself and my family and everybody around me because I'm a super wealthy guy and everybody loves me."
Mhm.
And you start thinking of yourself as a kind of a god.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to see this, I think, modeled looking at like the wealthiest men in our time, right?
Hmm.
They like to play God. They like to tell everybody what to do, or they like to, try to wield their influence. Not that there's anyone particular to have in mind right now,
Well,
but it's,
it's
yeah, it's kind of like I've brought up in almost every episode here for the Ten Commandments. Like you're in the context here. Like you're
yeah.
dependent on, first of all, your parents and God for your life at least. But even if you're some wealthy, billionaire with a dozen companies, people bought the product. Like,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
they've given you their money for that. And you have all these people working for you to hold the company together. If all that vanished overnight, you couldn't do it by yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I think for most of us, I mean, I don't know who's watching, but maybe you're helping a billionaire somewhere to change his mind. But I think for most of us, it's like balance in all things, right? I mean, as we pursue wealth, which we inevitably do because we want to be able to put food on the table, to help our family
Mhm.
survive. As we do that, we don't want that to be the end of all
Mhm.
things. We want it to be another tool that we use. I mean, like Jesus, when we looked at the parable of the unrighteous steward, or the bad manager or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
the shrewd manager. Jesus said, "I want you to use money to make friends, you
Mhm.
know, in the world." I mean, so we can use money, we can use it wisely, we can use it to build our human capital, we can use our financial capital and turn it into human capital, and help people with it. And so we just have to have balance in
Yeah.
all things.
Yeah, I'm not hoping that. I mean, it'd be nice if they did, but I'm not hoping to change any billionaires' minds. I doubt they're listening to us. But we can avoid developing the same mindset as them and thinking, I'm always like a month away from from bankruptcy and
Yeah,
losing my home and starvation. And if I just had all the money, then that wouldn't be a danger. It's like
yeah,
that's not exactly the right way to think of it. God says to I mean, we're gonna look. Agor here already said, "Give me only my daily bread." Jesus is going to
Yeah.
model that for us in the Lord's Prayer,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's all that we ask for.
Well, you want to read that Matthew 6,
Yeah.
9 through 15?
This then is how you should pray: Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins.
So all we ask for in this prayer is our daily bread.
Yeah, and there's even there where it talks about forgive us our debts or our trespasses, as we forgive others.
Mhm.
That's kind of, Jesus explicitly makes it about sin there, but that's kind of playing with that same idea, right? Don't just be out to get all that you can out of
Yeah.
somebody. Hold them to account for every little thing.
Mhm.
Be generous, be charitable with them.
Don't put somebody in the poorhouse because they owe you some money.
Yeah,
Forgive them.
whether that's
But
actually,
now,
economically or if it's more spiritually. But
Jesus had some very wealthy people that were his disciples that followed him around and supported his ministry.
yeah.
Like there were several women who
Yeah, well,
were
Matthew was a former tax collector, might have had resources.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. So yeah, I mean there was money involved in his ministry, and it's kind of famously in certain places. I
Mhm.
mean, then and we know that the woman who anointed Jesus, poured extremely
Mhm.
expensive perfume on him, and he accepted it very graciously
Yeah.
when others didn't.
And Judas complains about it because that money could have been given to the poor. That's interesting. You can't even let charity become your God because God is still God. So it's still better for her to pour that out on Jesus because he's
Mhm.
God than for Judas to say everything, all things, even the glory due to God must be sacrificed for, the charity to the poor.
Well, how do you even put a price tag on how you would celebrate what Christ did for humanity?
Yeah.
I mean, Mary or whoever it was took like the most expensive thing around that she had access to and used it to gratuitously thank Christ for what he was doing,
Hmm.
not even fully understanding what he was doing, but just, wanting to anoint him because he was the Christ, which means anointed one.
Hmm.
And she probably, along with Peter, were some of the few in his circle that were like, I know who this guy is.
Hmm.
But yeah, so it's interesting. I think that's that balance because you say, well, Mary was way out of whack with pouring all that expensive stuff on him. But then it's like, no, not really. He was God. He was
Yeah.
he was the only one who deserved it.
It's like you hear people say something like, why is the church built like these big cathedrals if people are still starving? And it's like to glorify God. Like the we also help the poor, but
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know, if we don't have beautiful buildings, works of art, etc., to glorify God, then we're gonna forget why He's worth worshiping, why His commands are worth listening to, and why we should help the poor.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I took it out of the notes. I was going to put in there, I think it's Cyril of Jerusalem, who's like way back in the third century or something,
Mhm.
who was brought
Yeah,
up on charges of selling church property to help feed poor during a famine. And it's kind of like, well, I mean, what else are you supposed to
yeah.
do? But he was vindicated later, and there may have been some other things going on with some Arian heresy and stuff that he was being charged with. But
Yeah, it depends on like the time and place. Like we talked about when they're wandering in the desert, God lives in a tent just like them. When they settle down and develop a whole kingdom, God gets a temple,
Mhm.
you know. And when their kingdom falls apart and they go in exile, the temple is destroyed, you know. And once they neglect God, then he neglects the king, however you want to look at that. He doesn't need that per se, but in whatever capacity we can, whether it's two copper coins or a massive cathedral or, whatever we can do to glorify God is worth doing.
Well, when you have the kind of wealth that Solomon had, whether he should have had it or not, I don't know, but like however you want to look at that, but
Yeah.
that would be an appropriate thing for
Hmm.
Solomon to do with his massive wealth
Yeah.
if he had it, I guess. But we're not supposed to though collect a massive hoard of treasure here on earth,
Hmm.
right? But um That's something that you see in Matthew 6:19 through 21. It says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasure on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. And where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And I think even the temple fits this description
Yeah.
because it got knocked down by a bunch of thieves,
Mm-hmm.
who vermin and if you whatever you want to say,
Well,
came and destroyed it.
Yeah.
And
That's what we saw in Jeremiah earlier, right? They're using the temple in vain, using the Lord's name in vain.
yeah,
It's like, guess what? I don't need the temple. Just
right.
like in Hosea, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Or in
Mhm.
the Psalms, do you think I come to you because I'm hungry? Like,
Yeah.
give me some beef, please.
Well, God told everybody when they said they wanted a king, He's going to do dumb stuff with your money and your daughters and
And your
your
sons in
sons,
battle.
and He's going to do all these dumb things that you're going to look at later and go, "Oh man, He took in
That's
all my
exactly
wealth and treasure, and He's
that's
done."
exactly what we do with our presidents, isn't it?
Mhm.
Every 4 years, we look to another idiot to save us, like he's
Yeah,
going to be the Messiah, and then 4 years later, we're like, what a nincompoop! That guy
Mhm.
ruined everything. Like,
yeah.
they always come
It's
in on obviously winning an election, and then they go out with terrible approval ratings.
Well, but getting back to this temple idea though, God was like, "I don't need a temple." Like He told David, "I don't. Why did you think I needed one? I mean, I was happy being in a
Yeah.
tent." And so but you want to make it, so I'm not going to stop you,
Hmm.
but I'm not going to let you do it. Your son's going to do it, um, but it happens. But God's not heartbroken. I mean, God's like, "Look, I couldn't have cared less about this temple. I'm glad you did it if you do it with a good heart and and everybody's into it and it's a good
Hmm.
thing. It blesses people and it makes the world a better place and it brings joy to people, which is one thing we looked at, that God wanted. But when it stops serving that purpose, it's just a bunch of wood and gold and stuff. I don't need that stuff. I don't really care.
So, I think we can understand what it looks like to store up treasures on earth, but what does it actually mean to store up treasure in heaven? Like, isn't that? I was making fun of platitudes earlier. All you need is love. Is that not just kind of a nice idea, a phrase that sounds good? What does that actually mean?
Yeah. So like what kind of treasure awaits us in heaven? And I think if you've been following our podcast, my answer to that is that heaven comes with
A
God.
pony.
Huh?
A pony, right?
A pony? No.
Oh, I don't know. I'm way off.
Yeah, Caleb hasn't been following. He doesn't actually watch the podcast. He just sits next to me when we record it. But uh,
Yeah, I only listen when I'm talking anyway.
no, but what is the treasure that awaits you in heaven? And it's God, right? It's heaven comes with God. And so the great thing about being in heaven is you get to be with God all the time. And the book of Revelation describes it that way quite beautifully in a lot of different passages. And one we wanted to read this episode was Revelation 22, verses 12 through 17, which says, "Look, I am coming soon. My reward is with me, and I will give to each person according to what they have done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Blessed are those who wash their robes, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may go through the gates into the city. Outside are the dogs, those who practice magic arts, the sexually immoral, the murderers, the idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices falsehood. I, Jesus, have sent my angel to give you this testimony for the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David and the bright morning star. The Spirit and the bride say, 'Come,' and let the one who hears say, 'Come.' Let the one who is thirsty come, and let the one who wishes take the free gift of the water of life." So here in heaven, you're going to have the tree that was forbidden in the beginning is going to be available again. It's like a return to the garden, and then you got the water flowing through, the water of life. So
Yeah.
it's back to the garden. He talks about he's the beginning and the end. And so we're going to go at the end back to where we were in the beginning, back
Right.
to the idyllic life with God, with a restoration of not only the Garden of Eden, but a restoration of the communion and the community, that we had with God, the companionship we had then.
I like there towards the end, he says, I, Jesus, have sent my angel to give you this testimony for the churches. What testimony is that? Verse 17, the Spirit and the bride, which is the church, say, come. And let the one who hears say, come. Let the one who is thirsty come. And the one who wishes takes the free gift of the water of life. It's offered freely, And I just love how welcoming that is.
Well, it's everything that the people in Jeremiah's time wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And God's like, just return to me. And they're like, nope, not going to do it. And he's like, well, don't even pray for them, because if they won't return to me, then there's nothing for them.
Yeah.
Because he is the reward.
Right.
He is the reward. They wanted the temple. He's like, what, the temple? The temple? It's like the playoffs? Playoffs. Like, God's like, temple? The temple?
Yeah.
I don't want the temple. I want you, So,
right.
Anyway.
Yeah, and that goes back to, like we were talking about, the gifts can be mistaken for the giver, or the blessing for the blesser. So even the temple, or I was talking about why it's good, I think, to have great Christian art and architecture. Our churches should be beautiful, but that can also become an idol.
Well, even though God has codified property rights in the 10 Commandments, like in the top 10 of all the rules, they're still deceptive. Property, possessions, wealth.
You can't take any of it with you.
It's all deceptive.
Yeah, like Solomon says that you can't take any of it with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's do our 10 words takeaway: the negative and the positive. So first, the negative: when you steal from others, you recommit the original sin.
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of surprising, really, to see that Eve took the fruit. That was the first thing she did.
Yeah, and she even tried to take God's glory from him and take his character traits onto herself.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's a usurping, it's a stealing, the whole original sin, and like we showed, all the 10 Commandments can kind of be related to stealing.
Yeah.
So,
and any sin always breaks the first commandment, right? Putting something in the throne of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we don't want to have a bad motivation. So we talked about, like, what should we pursue? What should be our good motivation? And so our 10 words takeaway positive version is love others, practice charity, and receive your reward in heaven. This is the Revelation passage. Our reward is God.
Mm-hmm.
He's in heaven for us. And so our life here on earth should be about other people, and about the possessions we have should be about practicing charity. Using our possessions to bless other people. And you can bless yourself too. You can bless your family. If you gave away everything you had, like Jesus asked the rich young ruler, well, the last little bit you could probably keep for yourself, since you'd be one of the poorest people on the earth. But maybe for your next meal. But because very few people actually take Jesus' advice and give away everything that they have to the poor.
Yeah, it reminds me of Psalm 73, verse 25. We did a whole episode on Psalm 73 in the Old Testament series. David says,
That's Asaph.
Yes, I'm sorry. Asaph says, whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you.
Yeah.
And it's just like, in heaven, that's what we get. And on earth, nothing else compares to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything we have comes from God.
Right. And everything your neighbor has came from God.
Yeah.
So if you steal, you're telling God, you shouldn't have given that to Dave. You should have given it to me. It's mine. I want it.
Yeah. I mean, so you're stealing from God. Either way. Anybody who steals anything is also offending God, because he was the one that decided to bless somebody else with it. And so respecting the property rights of others is respecting God.
That's right.
So
how can we show love and respect to God? I mean, the best way, we heard the invitation. The bride says, come. The Spirit says, come. So, come to church. If you're not baptized, be baptized, receive the Spirit. And
Mhm.
that's how you join the community of love.
Yeah, join the communion, go into communion with Christ, and also communion with all your fellow believers in your church body. Well, he's Caleb and I'm Timothy, and thank you for listening to Bible discussions on Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. Please consider subscribing to our channel to help support our efforts. All scripture quotations, unless otherwise indicated, are taken from the Holy Bible, New International Version, NIV, copyright by Biblica, Inc., used by permission of Zondervan, all rights reserved. This program is copyright 2025 by Timothy Klingerman. God bless all of you.